Brussels and speak to Donnacha O'Beachain, who's a professor of politics at Dublin City University. Professor, thanks so much for your time. I don't know if you've heard this, but I have read, it was Bellingcat, the investigative company, who gets all this information through sources in Russia, which has said that everybody is corruptible in Russia because money talks. Do you think it'll ever come out, the truth about how that plane went down?
I think it's doubtful that we'll ever know exactly what happened, for the simple reason that it's the Russian state that is investigating, and most people believe that the Russian state itself, or at least the person at the very top of the Russian state, Vladimir Putin, who is responsible for this. So he's not going to incriminate himself, and he prefers, I guess, to let actions speak louder than words. His words are that he's conveying condolences with the tragic death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. He didn't wait for the DNA results to come in before offering those condolences. And that suggests that we're not going to see Yevgeny Prigozhin ever again. And that's a very convenient, of course, reality for Vladimir Putin, because there are many who believe that since June, when Yevgeny Prigozhin launched that abortive rebellion that really was the most serious threat to Vladimir Putin's reign, since he came to power almost a quarter century ago, that his days were numbered. And many suspect that he simply waited for 2 months until he had his ducks in a row. He'd organized his next steps and then gave the order to eliminate Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Given the organization that Prigozhin has built, given his charisma and his leadership, how much do you think his death is going to weaken the Russian state, weaken Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin's foreign policy?
Well, I think from Vladimir Putin's perspective, the elimination of Yevgeny Prigozhin is about strengthening Vladimir Putin's control of the Russian state. And of course, Putin sees him and the Russian state as inextricably linked. I mean, that's the reason why, for example, he disposed of the oligarchs at the very early stages of his rule, because he felt it was not in the interest of the Russian state, and certainly not in the interest of Vladimir Putin, to have a lot of power devolved in the hands of people who are not directly under the control of Vladimir Putin. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, he thought, because everything Yevgeny Prigozhin achieved was, you might say, attributable to Vladimir Putin, he thought he controlled Yevgeny Prigozhin up until June of this year, when he proved to be extremely unpredictable and extremely threatening. And it's then that you have this talk of Wagner being shut down. The recruitment offices in Moscow and throughout Russia have been closed. But Wagner still exists, of course. I mean, Russia never really admitted its existence up until very recent times. So the fact that we hear that it's officially non-existent, we have to take with a grain of salt.
So you don't see any negative blowback, any negative fallout from Prigozhin's death, especially, for example, in Africa, where he's supposed to have been just a few hours before returning to Moscow and getting onto that plane to St. Petersburg? Because with Wagner forces across certainly West and Central Africa, the Russians have gained influence specifically through Wagner.
That's true. They did gain influence through Wagner. Wagner was an important instrument of Russian foreign policy. It allowed Russia to outsource its dirty wars in Africa. And of course, Wagner leaders and of course the Russian state became wealthy as a result of those activities, because they were essentially armed thugs for hire. They managed to prop up allies in different African states, in resource-rich African states. But essentially, money was what kept Wagner together, and money is what drives that force in Africa. And that motive, that modus operandi, will continue with or without Prigozhin. The local African autocrats who are looking for Russian mercenaries won't really care who's at the top of that pyramid, as long as those troops are being provided. And from Vladimir Putin's perspective, there's something to be gained from asserting more control over Wagner, or at least Wagner if it emerges as another organization under a different name.
Professor Donnacha O'Beachain, thank you so much indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you.